Afternoon. This hearing is called to order. I'd like to thank the witnesses for appearing before the committee today to discuss an issue of emerging importance to small businesses and our national economy, enhancing the growth of manufacturing production in the United States. Over the last few decades, the United States has witnessed a significant decline in manufacturing jobs. While the value of the output of the United States manufacturers has more than doubled over the last 40 years, this growth in output value has not translated into similar increases into manufacturing employment. In fact, since peaking at more than 19 million jobs in 1979, total manufacturing employment has declined to a little over 12 million jobs today. Many economists attribute these employment declines to increases in manufacturing productivity, as the adoption of new technologies have permitted manufacturers to achieve higher output with fewer workers. Another factor is the emergence of new manufacturing opportunities overseas, many of which offer manufacturers lower labor costs compared to those in the United States. Over the last decade or so, this has led to a trend some have called offshoring, where domestic firms design and engineer products in the United States but conduct the actual manufacturing of the products overseas. However, there are signs that this trend is reversing as companies move production back to the United States, a trend commonly referred to as reshoring. In addition, the United States has begun to experience a process known as onshoring, as foreign companies relocate some of their manufacturing from their home countries to the United States. The purpose of today's hearing is to examine the extent to which manufacturing reshoring and onshoring trend is occurring, what factors are influencing it, what policies are necessary to help it reach its full potential, and what growth in American manufacturing means for small businesses. Before I introduce today's witnesses, I would like to yield to Ranking Member Chu for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. American manufacturing has been the nation's economic engine throughout much of the 20th century. The country rose to its place as a global economic superpower as customers clamored for the latest American-made products, from planes to cars to television sets. Our robust manufacturing sector employed tens of millions of Americans and helped build the middle class. However, manufacturing's role in the U.S. economy has changed considerably since the 60s. As the nation flourished, our economy evolved, moving away from manufacturing and more towards service-based industries such as healthcare, hospitality, and financial services. Simultaneously, countries like China and Brazil went through their own industrial revolutions, providing cheap labor and resources to become manufacturing epicenters. While the U.S. remains one of the most productive nations per manufacturing employee, offshoring has resulted in the loss of approximately 7.8 million factory jobs since 1979. In a positive development, U.S. manufacturing has witnessed resurgence in the past few years. In fact, the country's exports, a key measure of manufacturing activity, has been growing more than 7 times faster than GDP since 2005 and are now at their highest levels in 50 years. As U.S. manufacturing output has increased, the favorable economics of reshoring has spurred many U.S. businesses to bring factories and jobs back to America. A number of factors are leading to reshoring of manufacturing to the U.S. First, the competitiveness of China as a manufacturing hub is eroding. Factory wages have been increasing by double digits each year since 2000, bringing those more in line with the U.S. manufacturing wages. Second, the U.S. is in the midst of an energy production boom. Cheap domestic energy provides a significant competitive advantage for energy-intensive industries like steelmaking. At the same time, overseas transportation costs have skyrocketed, increasing more than 135% en route across the Pacific. These factors have combined to make the U.S. a very attractive option for new manufacturing opportunities. As such, a recent Boston Consulting Group report indicated a majority of the nation's largest companies, over $1 billion in revenue, are planning to move manufacturing back to the U.S. This, in turn, will have such a positive impact on our nation's small business community. Many small businesses form relationships with larger businesses as suppliers. These supply chain relationships inject over $1.5 trillion into our small business economy. As more large manufacturers reshore their operations, These figures are only going to increase. Small businesses have also benefited from world demand for made in the USA goods and cheap shipping rates. According to the census, small and medium-sized businesses account for 97% of all exporting firms and sent $460 billion in goods overseas in 2012, which is a $10 billion increase year over year. As the U.S. manufacturing revival continues to gain steam, we must be cognizant of potential stumbling blocks. For one, U.S. manufacturing has become sophisticated as technology has advanced over the past 25 years. This has led to a shortage of workers with the necessary skills to work in these factories, even when there are millions of unemployed Americans looking for work. As the U.S. becomes an attractive destination for new manufacturing facilities, workforce training programs must adapt to provide the skills necessary. We must also remember that economic growth depends on innovation. Research and development fuels technological advancement and is critical in fostering the high-tech enterprises that create new jobs. Unfortunately, the federal policy shift from domestic investment to deficit reduction could have severe implications for U.S. competitiveness in international markets and for manufacturing jobs. Going forward, we must ensure federal funding for research and development is not left on the cutting room floor. At today's hearing, we will examine the state of U.S. manufacturing and the outlook for future expansion and job creation. Over the past few years, the U.S. has closed the competitive gap with its overseas competitors. However, the manufacturing revival still faces headwinds. I'd like to thank our witnesses in advance for taking time to be here today. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mrs. Chu. If any other committee members have an opening statement prepared, I ask they submit it for the record. I'd like to take a moment to explain to you the timing lights in front of you. You each have 5 minutes to deliver your testimony. The lights will start out green. When you have 1 minute remaining, the light will turn yellow. Finally, at the end of your 5 minutes, it'll turn red. And I'm going to be flexible on that, but try to stay as close to the 5 minutes as you can. I'd now like to yield to Congresswoman, I pressed the wrong button. I'd now like to yield to Congresswoman Custer, a member of the full committee, so that she may introduce today's first witness.
Thank you so much to Chairman Rice and Ranking Member Chu for organizing this important hearing on reshoring and the trend in American manufacturing. By making smart, targeted investments and promoting programs that help our manufacturers succeed, we can keep our manufacturing sector growing and creating good middle-class jobs for years to come. New Hampshire is home to approximately 2,100 manufacturing companies. With our skilled workforce, first-class universities and community colleges, successful public-private partnerships, and high-tech businesses, New Hampshire is helping to lead an American manufacturing renaissance. During business visits through my Congress at Your Company series, I've met manufacturers who are committed to developing innovative technologies and creating good American jobs. And it's so encouraging to see evidence of companies reshoring their operations and jobs to the United States, and to see talented people like Shirley Mills, who's with us today, advocating for this critical movement. Ms. Mills is a director and senior research analyst at the Boston Company and a resident of my district, Windham, New Hampshire. She graduated from Columbia University with a BA in economics and earned an MBA from Harvard Business School. Ms. Mills started her career at Goldman Sachs and also worked as an analyst at Steinberg Asset Management before joining the Boston Company in 2007. At the Boston Company, a global investment management firm that uses quantitative research and analysis to provide investment advice to clients, Ms. Mills specializes in the industrial and utility sectors. Her insightful research on the global competitiveness of American manufacturing firms and the corresponding rise in manufacturing employment in the U.S. is helping to develop a stronger understanding of this important trend. Last year, I joined her husband, Steve Papa, the Vice President of Parallel Wireless, at a roundtable in Nashua, New Hampshire, to discuss developments in our innovation economy. Ms. Mills, thank you for testifying today on this important issue for American manufacturing. And thank you again, Mr. Chairman and Ms. Ranking Member, for giving me this opportunity to welcome a fellow Granite Stater to the Small Business Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman and Ms. Custer, for the opportunity to speak with you today. I'd first like to quickly address the dynamics that drove manufacturing activity to leave the U.S. and grow abroad, many of which have now reversed and may be encouraging manufacturing growth in the U.S. Several years ago, I published a white paper on this topic, citing a number of reasons for a then potential shift of manufacturing capacity back to the U.S. The reasons that I highlighted then remain the case today. I'd like to quickly address each. A weaker dollar has played a role in making the U.S. more competitive, and that has continued to remain low, indicating that this trend should continue. Wage differentials, as mentioned by Ms. Chu, have narrowed between the U.S. and other key manufacturing economies, both Europe and China. Energy costs, due in large part to U.S. innovation and entrepreneurialism, have declined in the U.S. relative to global levels, which supports ongoing manufacturing strength in the United States, as well as expansion of capacity by U.S. chemical and refining companies. And in recent years, global supply chains and transportation costs have become slower and more expensive, and in many ways riskier and more volatile, such that companies are less comfortable taking on the working capital needs in order to send capacity abroad. So my belief is that conditions do exist for reshoring, and it is happening. Recent analysis by The Economist cites 100 firms that have reshored manufacturing from appliances to high-tech devices. The Wall Street Journal recently highlighted a number of yarn companies that are spending millions of dollars on new capacity in North Carolina textile country and hiring hundreds of people. None of the companies mentioned in that article is U.S.-based, but it's an expansion that's creating jobs in the U.S. and opportunities for U.S. companies. Sometimes it's difficult to see significant trends in aggregate data, so it's worth noting that manufacturing employment is improving much more rapidly in areas of the United States that are benefiting more directly from lower energy prices. And in the economy as a whole, manufacturing employment has stabilized for the first time in decades. The cited willingness of large companies to invest in new capital spending in the U.S. is improving, which is very positive for the manufacturing employment outlook. According to consultancy ISI Group, willingness to invest in capacity in the U.S. has been improving for the past few years. I'd like to now address some policies that I believe can encourage this reshoring trend. The first is policy consistency and simplicity. Constant change in the regulatory and tax environment creates a headwind to decisions of any sort, particularly investment decisions. The industrial management teams I meet with very often cite policy uncertainty as one reason they are investing so little in the U.S. Comments about the level of policy and regulatory uncertainty felt by management teams are so frequent that they seem cliched to me at this point. With regard to energy policy, this area will become increasingly important to U.S. manufacturing in coming years. As I'm sure you are aware, the U.S. now has minimal exports of LNG and crude oil for a variety of economic and regulatory reasons. If exports increase, the global price differential that I mentioned between U.S. energy and global energy prices should narrow, which would weaken U.S. manufacturing momentum, particularly in industries with high input costs. As an equity investor, I constantly observe both the madness of crowds and the importance of compelling stories. And so I'd like to highlight the importance of attention to success. The dominant story of the 1980s through the 2000s was offshoring. In some cases, it made economic sense for manufacturers, but in other cases, managers simply followed the herd. I have now heard many stories in which a narrow focus on labor costs has backfired because of quality control difficulties, transport costs, working capital needs, intellectual property risks, and even eminent domain concerns. The dominant narrative does matter because management teams tend to follow the herd. Publicize examples of offshoring pitfalls and reshoring success. Changing the narrative will be an important part of changing the decisions. Focus on likely candidates. Some products are more likely to be reshored successfully than others, and policy should be emphasizing these areas. Products with a higher likelihood of successful reshoring include one or more of these characteristics: expensive shipping costs, high demand seasonality, significant needs for reliable, inexpensive energy, a low proportion of costs from direct labor, and a need for rapid product development or innovation. Michael Porter of Harvard University has written extensively on what he calls clustering. I believe one implication of his work is that historically strong regional clusters are still likely areas of opportunity. I know a small business entrepreneur who began manufacturing mugs in Ohio recently after importing them for 2 decades from China. I'm drinking from one today. He's from California. His parents were immigrants from Germany mid-century, but he found the existing infrastructure from Ohio's prior strength as a ceramics manufacturing hub helpful. So strengthening and building on existing infrastructure will make the decision to reshore easier for companies. Encourage expansion rather than exciting new facilities. As great as new facilities are, the reality is it's much easier for companies to expand existing facilities than to start things that are new. I recently toured a plant in my home state of New Hampshire where a mid-sized manufacturer has expanded its capacity at a plant that had been in operation for decades. And there they did bring some components directly back from a plant in China that had been manufacturing them. Don't forget the importance of innovation. The reshoring trend is due in part to hydraulic fracturing, automation, and other technological innovations. That's a strong differentiator for our economy, and the government plays a key role in basic science research. The private sector only emphasizes rapid commercialization at the expense of fundamental discoveries. Also, effective immigration for the highly skilled and educated is necessary if we are to make the most of some of our innovative potential. With regard to employee development, access to a flexible skilled labor force has become a barrier to U.S. manufacturing. A more formal job training support should be a key focus, again building on pockets of existing expertise. And in some depressed regions, expanded social services may be needed to help the long-term unemployed adapt and re-enter the workforce. Incentives and tax reform are also important, particularly with regard to small companies, because smaller, more domestically focused companies have higher effective tax rates than global corporations. According to The Economist, in the current tax system, the losers are smaller companies, which have less room for maneuver. Capital access will be addressed by some other speakers today, but it remains important, particularly for small companies as they try to expand capacity. And the regulatory burden for small companies is significant in the U.S. and is more important for the smaller companies than for larger. This is important to small business prospects because larger companies are better equipped to navigate complex regulatory environments and may encourage regulations that favor large companies. For example, according to The Economist, since lobbying is mostly confined to large established companies, the question is whether it discriminates against small, innovative groups. To conclude, time doesn't roll backwards. For the U.S. manufacturing economy and its workforce, the world is much more competitive than it once was. It can be tempting to talk about jobs coming back, but that is not quite accurate. It is rather that incremental investment in American manufacturing may create new and different jobs. They may be higher skilled and higher paid than those that were lost, but there will probably be fewer of them. The broader benefit to U.S. employment, particularly low-skill employment, will come from associated services, such as trucking, distribution, retail, and banking. Efforts to recreate what once was are not the right focus. Thank you again for the opportunity to offer my perspective on the reshoring of manufacturing to the U.S. as it relates to small business.
Very impressive. Our next witness is Mr. Bobby Hitt. Mr. Hitt was appointed by Governor Nikki Haley to serve as Secretary of the South Carolina Department of Commerce in January 2011. Mr. Hitt brings to his position a wealth of experience and knowledge in manufacturing. Prior to his current appointment, he served as Director of Planning and Development for a firm that helped convince BMW to locate an auto assembly plant to South Carolina. As Commerce Secretary, Mr. Hitt continues to work to attract new manufacturing investment and business to South Carolina, including domestic and foreign firms looking to reshore or onshore their manufacturing. And I can tell you he is a big reason why South Carolina has had the success it has in competing for and attracting jobs. Mr. Hitt, thank you for being here today. You may now deliver your testimony.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm delighted to be here with you and Ranking Member Chu, Ms. Klister from the full committee, and my colleagues here on the panel. I thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony today on the subject of reshoring of manufacturing in the United States and its broader impacts within the business community. Many industry observers have been talking about a manufacturing resurgence, as my colleague here on the panel has, or a renaissance, for quite some time. Research coming out of the Boston Consulting Group and other groups in the Northeast have confirmed this trend, as you've heard this afternoon. On the national level, between January 2011 and December 2013, the U.S. added 434,000 manufacturing jobs, a gain of 3.7%. This rebound follows a decade-long decline in manufacturing, as we know, at the national level, where nearly 5.5 million manufacturing jobs were lost, a decline of 32%. What I'm happy to tell you, speaking on behalf of South Carolina's lead economic development agency, our state is at the forefront of the manufacturing revival today. South Carolina, while a small state in physical size, has had a traditionally strong manufacturing presence. The sector continues to gain momentum. South Carolina's manufacturing GDP was $28.7 billion in 2012. This is approximately 16.3% of the state's overall economy, a larger share than that of the national economy, where manufacturing accounts for 12%. Between the end of the recession, as we recorded in July of 2009 and December 2013, South Carolina added 15,600 manufacturing jobs, an increase of 7.4%, more than double the rate of growth on the national scale over the same time frame. According to a report released by the U.S. Department of Commerce's Bureau of Economic Analysis, South Carolina is the fastest growing manufacturing economy in the Southeast. The report also ranks South Carolina's economy as the 12th fastest growing in the nation and tied with our northern namesake, North Carolina, as the fastest growing state on the East Coast. We are known as a heavyweight in the aerospace and automotive sectors with the highest per capita employment by foreign-owned companies in the country, the highest. For these reasons, the national trade press has given us a new moniker we now referred to as the Beast of the Southeast, and we're very proud of that. 20 years ago, it was a very different conversation. Manufacturing was picking up and moving out of the United States and in South Carolina. Hardest hit in our state was the textile industry, which shed 60,000 textile mill jobs and 12,000 apparel jobs over a 10-year period from 1998 to 2008, just in South Carolina alone. At the same time, however, the automotive sector was taking root in our state, anchored by German automaker BMW, where I spent 18 years of my career and where I developed a personal passion for manufacturing. Today, there are 45,000 South Carolinians employed by the automobile industry in South Carolina. More recently, we have successfully recruited the aerospace industry to South Carolina, including Boeing's 787 assembly operation, and our state has 3 of the top 4 global tire producers. There are several factors driving this reshoring and onshoring of manufacturing today. Logistics is a driving force. As companies seek savings in transportation costs, companies are moving back to the U.S. to get products to market faster and respond rapidly to customer orders in a just-in-time manufacturing environment. Workforce considerations and the desire to have influence over the quality of the finished product are important, as are lower energy costs and competitive costs for land. Recent announcements reinforce that onshoring is occurring in South Carolina. In 2013 alone, nearly $1 billion in capital investment and 1,200 new jobs were announced by manufacturers bringing their operations to South Carolina from overseas. The companies range in size and scope, but as some recent examples, Silcotech, which is a maker of silicone-based injection molding for the medical industry based in Canada, selected York County for its U.S. plant. The company is investing $3.5 million, creating about 50 jobs. Last year, 3 Walmart suppliers announced new facilities in South Carolina as part of Walmart's U.S. manufacturing initiative. Collectively, these 3 companies represent 800 new jobs and about $14 million in investment. Importantly, these announcements are occurring in our state's rural areas. In the past 3 years, under the leadership of Governor Haley, more than 30% of the projects we've recruited to the state have announced in South Carolina. Nearly a quarter of the jobs created have gone into the state's rural counties. The Walmart suppliers locating in our state include Kent International, a bicycle manufacturer. Bicycles have not been manufactured in the United States for a long, long time. The second is Element Electronics, a maker of TV sets, another product that has not been made in the United States in a long time. And yet another one, Lewis Hornick, which will produce window coverings and home textiles, something that was a tradition in our state in the past. Yes, textiles are returning as well to the U.S. Another prominent example for South Carolina, as well as some in North Carolina, is the Kier Group, a Chinese textile company which decided to build its first plant outside of China in Lancaster County, South Carolina, where they will produce industrial yarn. The company's $218 million investment is expected to create over 500 jobs. Of course, when speaking about manufacturing, by and large, these are larger operations employing hundreds, if not thousands, of workers who assemble products ranging from cars to planes to tires. The reason is that manufacturing facilities are becoming much more capital intensive. The average amount of capital investment by companies per manufacturing job created in South Carolina has more than doubled in just 4 years' time. In 2013, this figure was $424,000 of capital per job versus $176,000 in 2009. That's the rapid increase in the ratio between capital and labor. This points to the fact that overall, most manufacturing requires a large amount of capital and is difficult to grow to a meaningful scale for traditional small businesses. Where the small business community typically reaps benefits from manufacturing in our state is either by providing a value-added service in direct support of manufacturing operations, such as machining or repair, or providing other services such as janitorial, staffing, subcontracting on construction projects. For South Carolina, the jobs multiplier for automotive manufacturing, for instance, is approximately 4. There are also examples in our state of manufacturing contract work that has been onshored to manufacturing operations of fewer than 100 employees. This includes companies like Sargent Metal, which contracts with Otis Elevator and 8X Machining, which provides value-added work for the aerospace sector. Department of Commerce's mission is to recruit businesses to the state and to help existing businesses grow. Commerce has positioned itself as the state's business agency, no matter the size of that business. An area we have strived to augment over the past 3 years is our small business area, which offers resources and programs specifically aimed at the small business community. Those programs including export assistance, which has been the beneficiary of federal funds from the STEP program, that's the State Trade and Export Promotion Program. From 2011 through 2013, our staff helped 59 small and medium-sized enterprises enter export markets, resulting in almost $4 million in new sales. Additionally, we've hosted a series of events pairing small business owners with prospective lenders, something akin to speed dating, as we call it, for acquiring a business loan. The Department of Commerce works to connect the dots between small business and large industry. One recent success is Continental Tire, which is investing a total of $500 million in creating 1,600 jobs in Sumter, South Carolina. The tire maker announced in January that it has awarded some $100 million in contracts to South Carolina companies to date, an example of the ripple effect that occurs when a company of its scale locates in our state. There's more and more detail. I could go on and on. In closing, South Carolina is benefiting in a large way from the manufacturing investment, and I believe there will continue to be opportunities for our small business community to profit from the manufacturing renaissance. The adage, a rising tide floats all boats, certainly fits, and I thank the leadership in the committee for allowing me to testify today.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Our next witness is Kevin Harberts. Mr. Harbert serves as President and CEO of Crichton Engineered Materials, a small manufacturer of spun and fabricated medical components located in Cedar Falls, Iowa. As a supplier to other assemblers and original equipment manufacturers, Mr. Harbert has seen firsthand the benefits of manufacturing reshoring for his business and community. Mr. Harberts, thank you for appearing today. You may now deliver your testimony.
Good afternoon. My name is Kevin Harberts, President and CEO of Crichton Engineered Metals in Cedar Falls, Iowa. Founded in 1981, Crichton Metals is an industry leader in manufacturing spun and fabricated metal parts. We service a range of industries including foundries, ventilation, lighting, aerospace, and some automotive. Many of our products contribute to enhancing the nation's energy efficiency, and some are installed in LEED certified buildings across the country. Last year we had 63 employees. Today we have grown to 71 and hope to hire another 8 to 10 this year. We attribute this growth directly to reshoring, a product line which left the U.S. a decade ago and came back to America's heartland. But to understand our growth, you have to first understand how we got there. Like many others, the Great Recession hit us hard in 2008 and 2009. We had to let go 35 employees. For any family-owned business, this is one of the most difficult things that you can go through, but it was necessary for us to survive. Then about 2 years ago, a company sourcing from Europe was exploring whether they could return the manufacturing to the U.S. to serve the North American market. Location was important, but the real test was price. In our industry, a price differential of a fraction of 1 penny can mean the difference between getting the job and missing out. We were not in a position to hire more employees to meet the demand, so like all manufacturers, we had to learn how to do more with less. The company did invest and increased our automation to meet their target prices. Our customers slowly began transferring the work to our shop in Iowa, and now we are looking at a $5 to $6 million product line. For a $10 million a year company, this changed the fate of our business and the lives of our employees. Prior to reshoring its business from overseas, the customer had to wait 2 months to receive the product. After reshoring, its delivery time went from 2 months to 2 weeks. They can now develop new products for it in a matter of weeks rather than wait for a ship to cross the Atlantic. The decision of our customer to supply from Crichton Metals will carry us into 2020. We're going to save our customer money, grow our business, and most importantly, create jobs in Iowa and throughout our entire U.S. supply chain. These kind of opportunities just don't happen often in our industry. In convincing the customer to bring the work back to the U.S., we not only created jobs at Crichton, but we created jobs for our suppliers and vendors as well. For example, my raw material purchases have increased fourfold due to this reshored business. This is an important point about the manufacturing industry. Not only do we directly employ 12 million Americans, but our industry indirectly supports a combined 18 million jobs. While we are currently growing, we struggle to find qualified employees to fill our job openings. Crichton Metals hopes to hire another 8 to 12 more Iowans this year, a significant expansion for a small business. These are not minimum wage-paying jobs. For some of my openings, the starting salary is $70,000 to $80,000 a year plus benefits. In addition, the uncertainty in Washington isn't helping. While politicians argue among themselves, employers like me are stuck in a holding pattern. We don't know whether Congress will extend the R&D tax credit. We're unsure that new rules OSHA and EPA will impose on us, and we can't find qualified workers, in large part because Congress has not updated our jobs training law in over a decade. Crichton Metals' future looks pretty sunny at the moment, but manufacturing's future is incredibly cloudy. Although the economy is improving, it isn't doing so at the rate we need. To improve manufacturing's forecasts, we must look to overseas opportunities and convince foreign customers that the U.S. is the best place for manufacturing. We are doing our part to encourage reshoring. Now it's Washington's turn. Thank you for allowing me to testify today and to highlight the great story that is manufacturing in America.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harberts. Mrs. Chu, if you'd like to introduce our next witness.
It is my pleasure to introduce Ms. Mei Shi. She is the CEO and co-founder of Chesapeake Bay Candle. This company produces high-end scented candles and is one of the most popular candle brands around the world and is sold in major U.S. retailers such as Target, Kohl's, and TJ Maxx. She is a small business that has over 100 employees in the U.S. She was manufacturing abroad, but when the decision came to set up a new plant, she decided to locate it in the U.S. She recently spoke at a roundtable at the White House on insourcing American jobs. And she talked about the factors in her decision and what America needed to do to encourage this. She is a very successful entrepreneur and an outstanding spokesperson. Ms. Shi.
Thank you for inviting me, Chairman Rice and Congresswoman Chu, and distinguished members. Our company, Pacific Trade International, is one of the leading home fragrance suppliers in the U.S., with brands like Chesapeake Bay Candle, Bliss Living Home, and Alasis. We generate over $60 million in revenue each year and employ about 130 people in Maryland. We supply home fragrance product from candles, reed diffusers, and other accessories to major retailers such as Target, Kohl's, now also Bloomingdale's. Since 1994, our products have been produced and sourced mainly from China and then Vietnam. We hold an ownership stake in most of these facilities and could depend on reliable, higher quality supply chain. In the middle of the financial crisis, like my partners just spoken, we have seen a rapid increase in the cost of labor, freight, and materials in Asia, while demand has increased from our retail partners for faster replenishment cycles, as well as their need for lean inventory. The pressure on costs and inventory led our company to become one of the earliest proponents of the insourcing trend. The following reasons pushes us to make the U.S. our final destination for manufacturing operations rather than considering traditionally less expensive candle destinations such as Mexico and Poland. The number one reason is speed to market. Our U.S. factory can deliver replenishment orders with 1 week versus 4 to 5 weeks from Asia. This makes our factory attractive for retailers, particularly on seasonal sensitive products such as your pumpkin spice and your Christmas tree scent. The second reason is the cost of shipping and logistics, as Ms. Chu has mentioned. In the middle of the financial crisis, when everything else has been in confusion, the biggest thing that is for sure is the rising cost of transportation due to oil prices increase. This decision helped us avoid transnational shipping and relying only on domestic shipping, and it cut unpredictable cost variations due to oil price and the constant demand and supply changes that impact ocean line prices. The last reason is production cost. Automation made it possible for manufacturing in the U.S. to be comparable to that of Asia. Once we make the decision, we quickly decided to look at Maryland as our destination because we want to make the link Chesapeake Bay Candle to the manufacturing facility. We looked at miles and miles of unoccupied warehouses along the 695 corridor. Many of you might have visited. It's heartbroken to see that so many manufacturing has left Maryland, and 1 out of every 4 blue-collar workers in the county of Baltimore was unemployed. We decided to build our factory there, taking advantage of the abundant warehouse space, as well as give back to the community that has given us the brand and its reputation. Built without any government incentives or support from local agencies, PTI's new facility in Glen Burnie, Maryland, was budgeted to cost approximately $4 million in capital investment, working capital for startup and inventory. We were unable to identify any source of available government financing that did not require a lengthy application and approval process. The Maryland Economic Development Council offered the possibility of low interest rate financing, but the review process proved to be too lengthy and the funding limits too restrictive to meet our needs. In the absence of viable funding options, the company proceeded with the project from its cash reserve and our own savings. The time to completion from initial lease execution was planned to be approximately 6 to 8 months, with completion planned for Q4 of 2010. In reality, Maryland has not seen manufacturing in the last 20 years. It was very confusing to even ask where do we look for guidance for meeting the code that is required to open a facility. We were directed to one clerk in the county of Anne Arundel, and he threw 3 big books the size of your yellow page telephone numbers. One was for hospitals, one was for nursery school, and one was for a restaurant. And he made us read all of them in order to meet the codes that maybe will meet the requirement. Such delays and confusions end up costing us 5 months and $2 million extra to finish the project. We managed to open the business. There's a timeline here that really gives you a clear definition of why the delay comes from, but I would eliminate all these details. But since opening in 2011, the Chesapeake Bay Candle Factory has now grown from 17 employees to over 80 and projecting to over 100 by the end of the year, and tripled production capacity. It is now one of the leading new job creators in Anne Arundel County, and I heard there's going to be a job opening for the big casino, so we're very concerned about that competition. The company faces challenges in finding quality employees. Most applicants lack sufficient skills or training. Basic reading, writing, and arithmetic skills are often not available, and many are unable to follow instructions or function in a modern, collaborative production environment. To combat a 50% turnover rate in these jobs, additional incentives are being considered by our company. The local area has also suffered from a lack of qualified mid-level supervisory talent and engineers, reflecting.
Mrs. Shee, I'm sorry. We have got to go vote. We've got 2 minutes and 59 seconds to get over there. We're gonna stop the hearing, just recess it. We'll be back in about 30 minutes. Okay.
Okay.
So 30 to 40 minutes, and I'll adjourn for recess right now. We'll be back.
Okay.
All right, the hearing is resumed. Call to order. Mrs. Shee, if you would like to continue with your opening statement.
As I concluded, as we are growing, the local area in and around the county also suffers from the lack of qualified mid-level supervisory talent and engineers, reflecting the absence of relevant vocational training and a vanishing ecosystem of other manufacturing companies. Here are some of our recommendations to the committee to help create more manufacturing jobs. Number one, create regional advisory offices within U.S. Department of Commerce or as an extension of the Small Business Administration to help small and mid-sized businesses navigate state, local, and other regulatory requirements. Many investors may not know how to determine which state best fulfill their manufacturing and business needs, and a federal level review of each state will help speed up the selection process. Number two, through the same mechanism, guide companies to relevant incentives for tax breaks, financing, training, and other programs, whether sponsored by local, state, or federal entities. Number three, provide a resource guide specific to new manufacturing ventures to help identify local suppliers, private developers, and other assets critical to startups. And I also would like to recommend a state-level one-stop concierge service to help new investors understand compliance issues and the procedures related to building manufacturing facility so that they can make more informed decisions. Number five, encourage local high schools and vocational colleges to provide gateway programs to internships and apprenticeship for local manufacturers to draw upon us as a resource for qualified talent. To close, I would like the committee to think about helping small business owners in particular in financing and tax breaks, since all capital investment has become increasingly challenging because of the size and the difficulty for banks to give loans. I want to once again thank the committee for allowing us to share the journey of our determination and our challenges. I hope that we would help educate Americans that we should be a nation that not only consume and purchase goods, but also manufacture them, and hope that we would cultivate an appreciation for manufacturing and for made in USA. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Shee. Very impressive. I now yield to the ranking member for her questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start with Ms. Shee. In your testimony, you listed several reasons that led you to decide on the U.S. as the location for your new manufacturing facility. As one of the business leaders pioneering the reshoring of jobs to the U.S., how do you think the federal government can best reach out and help other businesses who might want to consider the U.S. as their manufacturing destination?
I think one of the main challenges has been echoed by Ms. Mills is the complexity of different state requirements, coding, and regulations. For federal government, mainly I think from the Commerce Department or affiliations, maybe we can start looking at one-stop shop to inform everyone in this particular area, where to find the answers, and also to work with SBA for facilitating the necessary funding that manufacturing investment needs.
I know that your business will probably continue to grow. What would be the most important factor affecting your decision to continue manufacturing in the U.S. and perhaps even expand operations here?
We definitely are determined to grow as our demands, our orders actually every month is exceeding our capacity. The biggest challenge is now people. We don't have a very good answer on how to have a program that can help us to find people that is from high school or even some college degree, because the mentality of working in a factory floor is a very different one than what we can find. I heard in Michigan when I was joining the White House forum that they set up training workshops close to big manufacturing facilities for 4 to 6 weeks. They have high school kids that go to those programs and learn the ABCs of what a manufacturing company work environment is. So they mentally are trained to enter the workforce. And I would hope that states and government can think about such programs.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to ask this to the entire panel, and that is that there are many small manufacturers with growth potential that may not seek assistance with operations, marketing, and finance because they're simply unaware that it's available. However, the SBA has many entrepreneurial development programs, including the Small Business Development Centers and the Women's Business Centers. What could we do to increase the awareness amongst the entrepreneurs of the SBA's business counseling services?
I'll go first. I agree with you, Congresswoman. When we came in, we saw a number of, there were a lot of agencies trying to provide the same services, but doing it in a way that people could not find them. We brought all of those together. I brought a team in. We built a website that we have so that someone can go in and put in the name of the county they're in. They can put in the type of business, the size of it in terms of its capital and its program, and it's sort of a decision tree that starts bringing you down to the programs that are applicable. It's hard to look at the array of programs out there for an average person and try to sort out what's applicable to them. So we in government, on state level and federal level, ought to do those things together in order to make it easier for them. I have this belief that there are people at home at night at 8 o'clock on the web trying to find a way to expand their business and find capital and looking for people like them that they can interact with, especially with entrepreneurs. We need to do more of a job of being an enabler to help them find those programs.
Yeah, I would just actually iterate what he is saying as well. We took advantage of SBA probably 7, 8 years ago was probably our last time that we used them, but the complexity that we ran into in the rules and regulations, we got bogged down in that, and we just didn't have anybody to help us. So we have not used them since. But I think if they can streamline that a little more than it is already, make it easier, it'd be a win-win.
Mm-hmm.
I am thinking that because most of the SBA programs to sponsor or guarantee a commercial bank to offer loans. So working with commercial banks and letting commercial banks be the ambassador for those programs, because a lot of the small businesses deposit with banks. So making them be the advocate of those programs and the informers of those programs, held special events for SBA to come to local branches where small business tend to gather. It's a great, grassroots level awareness to raise.
Mm-hmm.
Push that.
I agree with all of those. I'd also highlight that you could use word of mouth. There are organizations that, particularly small business entrepreneurs, don't have peers that they can frequently speak with about these things. And so oftentimes they join organizations like YPO and some others. And if that can help spread the word, then that would be a way that they could learn. The other thing is just, I do some additional work with financial literacy and financial capability. And one of the things that shows up repeatedly there is that people do not absorb things until the moment at which they need the information. And so finding ways to insert that relevant information into the decision point when it becomes relevant, for example, potentially with the commercial banks, would be, I think, the best way to do it. Because although people do sit at home at 8 o'clock every night, I think you're completely right, they probably don't necessarily notice what they might need a month from then when it comes to that decision point. So both of those things, I think that the decision tree is brilliant and the website is a great idea, but I would also try to insert it when the decision's being made and when the regulations are being dealt with.
Yeah, very good point. Ms. Mills, you mentioned in your testimony that access to capital continues to be a challenge to small businesses trying to expand. This is one of the most critical issues, particularly for this committee. Can you expand on specific policy recommendations this committee could take up to expand access to capital to small businesses, especially those in manufacturing?
Yes, I think that this is a complex area because typically it's not the best idea for the capital to be coming from the government, right? You're trying to incentivize banks and commercial lenders to be willing to loan on a circumstance that to them I think seems quite risky. So ways to mitigate that risk, I'm not sure exactly what those would be, but receivables, financing, things like that might be helpful. I think the others on the panel might have some additional thoughts.
Well, we're starting to see different kind of equity organizations be created, including business development, corporations, and the like. For reasons, and I have no banking experience, so I can't really speak to it, but what we constantly are being told that the old way, when I was young, where you would borrow and grow, is no longer really a viable way in the current banking system. You can't go in and borrow money to grow. You can only borrow money if you have the assets and don't need them, so to speak. But we have crowdfunding bills coming up. We've got a whole variety of things coming in, which is an indication to me that the system that we once had is become impenetrable, and therefore, typical of the American way, there are many different answers being created. Whether they will solve the problem or do it fast enough or with the speed that we want, it's another matter altogether. But there are a lot of different avenues out there. When we talk about the government ones, going back, I mentioned in my testimony what we call speed dating. And what we do is we do these in different towns and communities around the state. And we bring all the lenders into a big room. And we invite all of the small business contacts we've had into the room and lock the doors and make them get along. Works. Actually, we make it a little more fun than I'm making it sound.
Well, let me ask Mr. Harberts a question about, you talked about having trouble finding qualified workers for low and mid-level positions. And in his budget, President Obama recently proposed over $7.7 billion in new funding for apprenticeship programs and job training to help eliminate the skills gap. Do you think this would be helpful in closing that skills gap and perhaps in getting our 10.5 million unemployed citizens and the underemployed back to work?
Absolutely, I think that will help. I've been looking for a robotics engineer for almost 2 years, and in our area, John Deere has a huge presence, and Rockwell Collins. And as a small employer, those guys get everybody that comes out of the community colleges. They're only graduating about 20 to 25 kids a semester. And most of those kids are spoken for in their first 6 months of their apprenticeship. And I don't have a chance to get any of these guys. But I do think that will help, definitely will help. But it is a challenge for a small entrepreneur versus a big corporation in attracting these kids. I go into the high schools and junior highs myself, and I speak to these kids to try and get them interested in manufacturing, because a lot of times kids equate manufacturing to what it was back in the 40s. It's not a dark, dungy, old, oily factory. It's high tech, and whatever we can do to encourage that thought is good. So I do a lot of that. But I think what President Obama has done is definitely going to go a long ways to helping.
And Ms. Shih, I have a feeling you have an opinion about this.
Well, it goes back to let's have some pride in making things again, because not everyone is cut to be Bill Gates. Let's say there are still those of us who is creative and who enjoy making the most delicious cookies or beautiful candles. And there should be another thing about Made in USA, as a lot of Asian countries are suffering in terms of the trust of their manufacturers and the process in food and in other products, consumer product. We have a great chance to export. Made in USA stands for authenticity and a great consistency and quality. So there's a huge demand now. If you look at a lot of malls, you can see a lot of foreign people with luggages. They're buying up things that are, our chocolate, our coffees, because they think there's nothing they should worry about in quality. So I hope that the program really go down to the level of training high school kids, not people already having a lot of job offers, because that's the real gap that's existing.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
May I share a few thoughts on that?
Oh, of course.
If you don't mind. So 3 thoughts. The first is the people I speak with run a lot into absenteeism in addition to issues with skills. And it's not always as simple as just providing the skills. Sometimes there's cultural dynamics at work as well, and incentives may be necessary in order to get people to understand that the regularity of the structure of working in a job like this is different than what they might be used to. And the other thing is, I think what I heard in some of the comments, I'd like to tie back to something I mentioned, which is the importance of the story of success here. Because when you put lenders in a room with manufacturing companies and you tell them you need to lend to these companies to grow, if they still believe in the decline of American manufacturing, it's a very different conversation than if they understand that things are really changing. And that also matters a lot in terms of encouraging people to go into the types of programs that will create those robotics employees. So it's a soft thing, but some of the things that can be done are just creating these success stories and making them more public so that people have a different frame of mind. But the apprenticeships are an important part of it. But on-the-job training typically is more successful than structured programs.
Thank you. And I yield back.
Thank you, Mrs. Chu. Mr. Harberts, I'm going to start with you because you said something I was interested in. You were talking about the lack of skilled labor. And it's fascinating to me to see the high rate of unemployment of people coming out of typical 4-year colleges who've majored in areas that may not be as employable. And yet in our area, for example, we have a technical school called Florence Darlington Tech, and they have a very advanced CDM program, computerized digital machining program. I was talking to the guy. In fact, he came and testified here 6 months ago. And they can take, I believe it's 80 students a year. It's a 2-year program. And first of all, they can't find enough people to sign up for it. And the worst problem they have is they can't get people to graduate. You know why they don't graduate? They get the jobs before they graduate. Because after the first year, they're hired away at high salaries, and they can't get them to finish the program. So we absolutely have a mismatch. And the really bothersome thing about that is that some of the neighboring counties to this area are some of the highest unemployment in the state. Well, in Marion County, South Carolina, we have 15% unemployment. And yet they can't find enough students to sign up for this program with a 100% placement rate. So it truly is, there is a big mismatch. And how we fill that is an interesting problem. Mrs. Shee, you were talking about do you export now, or you were talking about the prospect of exporting?
We are very happy to say we're exporting from day one, of course, to our neighbor Canada, Australia. Now we're also going to be in China.
What port do you use, or do you know? Which port?
Port Baltimore and California.
One thing that's serving on this committee and on the Transportation Infrastructure Committee and learning about the need to have ports that can accept these Panama Canal ships, post-Panamax ships.
It would speed things up.
Well, it drops the cost of shipping. So it'll cost, instead of $3,000 a container, it'll cost $2,500 a container. So if you're sending a container of candles to Australia, and you can do it $500 cheaper if you can take a post-Panama Canal ship.
And to
or
Mexico
or if you don't have
Brazil.
access to that ship and the guy up the road does, who's going to have a competitive advantage? So we need to make sure our ports can accept these things. And the problem is the federal regulatory requirements are so strict on digging out a port. Mr. Hitt, you know how long Charleston's been working on getting their port dug out?
Yes, sir. Been a long time.
Been years and years, hasn't it?
Yes, sir. I believe the study's going to start this year, however.
Port Everglades has taken 15 years to get approval.
Well,
15 years.
Yeah.
Congressman, as you remember, we funded it from state level because we could not wait any longer.
Yes, sir, and I worked hard on getting that language in there for you in the water bill.
Yes, sir, you did.
But no, it is a huge problem, and everybody up here has talked about federal regulatory web and how it stifles business growth and competition. You know, I come from a background of local government. I was chairman of a county council, and we decided we were going to get in the economic development business, and it worked. And we decided to compete. Counties across the country compete. Charleston County competes with Savannah County and counties in Georgia and counties in North Carolina and counties in Tennessee. State of South Carolina doing a pretty effective job of competing for jobs. Not necessarily taking jobs from other states, but where is that business coming into this country going to locate? And this man right here has been responsible for a lot of that competition, a lot of that success in competition. Mr. Hitt, what I want to know from you is, and I also want to know this from you, Mrs. Mills, do you think the United States is doing an effective job of trying to compete for jobs? Do you think we have an attitude, like a lot of our states have, and like a lot of our local governments have, of let's go and figure out why we're not competing and let's compete? I want to know if you think we're doing it, and if you do think we're doing it, what entity in the United States government do you think is doing that? Mr. Hitt?
We're not competing as effectively as we could. We are successful in much of our international efforts because we have such a strong consumer market. And companies want to come here because they want to learn and be able to increase their penetration of this market. My company, BMW, was one of those 20 years ago. I think we lack competition because we don't have a sense of certainty in terms of our budgets. We don't have a sense of certainty in terms of the tax programs that we have in the United States. One of the things that we do when we are attracting companies to South Carolina is we sit down and lay out to them 30 years worth of tax issues for South Carolina and how they're going to be managed. We tell them this is it, and then we stay with them. So predictability is such an important thing in business that companies, especially companies from around the world that might have to deal in multiple currency and capital and treasury systems, they need to be able to predict. As you know, as a county councilman, the predictability of local taxes, which we have a mechanism for in South Carolina, where we can even equalize them over a long period of time, even with increases in investment a long time, and re-level them. That was more important to my old company at BMW than the rate, was the ability to predict what was going to happen next so they could compete on a worldwide stage. Companies like that come to South Carolina. We have become the #1 exporter of tires, the #1 exporter of cars, and the reason is because it's cost effective to build material there and sell it around the world. That's because it's predictable. And if the U.S. was more predictable, it would be good. Also, I would mention on the issue of engineers and such, if I walk into an engineering classroom at Clemson University, which is our major engineering school, half the students in that class will leave this country when they graduate because they're not native to our country. And as a result, we have a great drain the way we train and then do not have the opportunity to use those folks. That's a difficult thing. I was with an international company, the ability to move people around and manage that brain trust and be able to learn from each other across different cultures and expand our productivity and the like is lost because we simply don't have the swiftness with which to do that anymore.
I'd say the answer to your question is no. I don't see that happening in the way that you implied might be helpful, and I agree that it would. And I would highlight that when I meet with management teams, what I hear frequently is that other countries have a much more cohesive strategy and offer them things that seem much more transparent and much more clear. Over time, they often learn that what they believe from other countries would be transparent, clear, and straightforward is not. And part of what's happening with things beginning to come back is people are realizing that what they believed was certainty abroad wasn't certainty after all, and that in fact there's more equality in that dynamic between the United States and other countries than they had thought when they initially moved things abroad. So I agree that the inconsistency is a problem and the constant change is a problem, and that there's a lack of strategy and a lack of focus in trying to communicate to people the things that are worthwhile and the things that are good. But I actually think on the margin it is getting better, and if it begins to be encouraged, that it could be quite important. But for example, something that I'm hearing about a lot right now is this question about export of crude oil. And if you're trying to decide whether to build a refinery or whether to build a chemical plant or whether to add a lot of new tank cars so that you can move crude around the country, that has an absolutely massive impact on your investment decision, and there's very, very little uncertainty around it because the discussion changes from day to day. And that delays investment and growth that would be happening right now, likely, if that were not the case.
Something that really comes to my mind is something I've been working on and something that's really bothersome to me as my history as a tax lawyer and a CPA. When we have, the Affordable Care Act is a pretty big factor to companies, particularly those that employ over 50 people. And when we have these things, these aspects of it changed every month, does that affect companies' decisions? Does that uncertainty that creates affect hiring decisions and so on and so forth?
It's part of the conversation. So what I've been hearing from people recently is, for example, frustration about the fact that they're not certain they can get people the quality of care they need if they need to shift them. And I don't see it in affecting investment decisions as much as I see it part of the overall culture of confusion and lack of clarity. I think that from a tax perspective, something that's much more significant is the complexity of managing the tax code and the fact that that gives such an advantage to larger companies, particularly companies with operations abroad that can appropriately or otherwise, not passing judgment there, can use, sometimes it's each, can use transfer pricing to make certain that their profits are not in a higher tax location. So I would point to tax simplification as something that I think is much more significant.
What about tax rate?
Less important.
Less important, even if we have the highest rate in the world.
We have the highest rate in the world only on a statutory basis, not on an actual paid basis. And when you actually adjust for a lot of things in other countries that are taxed in different ways, for example, higher payroll taxes, other things, I believe, based on the research I've done, that our tax rate compared to many other places is not really that out of line. Now, if companies can shift to Ireland and pay 0% tax rate, which is what's now being done by some pharmaceutical companies.
Canada?
Not as big a difference, but I'm not as informed on that. It's the overall global tax structure that exists right now is about to send things, I do think, into an unpredictable environment because of what's happening with being able to pull companies to locations that have extremely low tax rates.
Mr. Hitt, what do you think about that?
I think the air of confusion that Ms. Mills is talking about, whether it be with health care, with tax structures, or what have you, it creates a perception of not great stability. Companies look for stable environments in which to be able to predict outcomes. They have a lot of variables, and any manufacturer is faced with new variables every day. They're trying to have predictability. So I hear from companies, they talk about health care, they talk about the confusion, they talk about taxes, they talk about the confusion. They talk about the differential, should one of their suppliers be in Mexico, because Mexico has a tariff advantage. If we're going to export from the United States, our advantage is less than Mexico's advantage. The view is that no one is paying attention to our advantages.
Ms. Mills, you mentioned Michael Porter, and I'm a Michael Porter disciple. And he's written a menu of things. He's a specialist in national competitiveness. And his menu includes sustainable federal budget, high-skilled immigration reform, corporate tax reform, international tax system rather than taxing global earnings, internet trade, reform of the trade system, streamline regulation, which I think everybody up there, every one of you guys mentioned regulation as a problem, infrastructure improvement, and reasonable, responsible development of shale and oil gas reserves. So, in my opinion, if we get the costs down here, maybe we don't have the lowest wages in the world, but maybe some of these other costs being lower can help. I don't want to compete for low-wage jobs. I mean, that's not my, I don't want to compete for minimum wage jobs. I want good, high-paying jobs. And
I think one of the things we're all saying is that good, high-paying jobs also create more minimum wage jobs,
Correct.
right.
and that those are an important thing to have as well.
So if you look at this list, how do you think, I'm going to go to you, Mr. Hitt, because you're doing it in South Carolina right now. How do we start working toward these things at a national level? It seems to me that we need somebody focused on this, on competing. Do you have any suggestions for us? How do you do it in South Carolina? How do you pull all these entities together and say, we need to do these things to compete?
Well, of course, in most of the states, we have balanced budgets. We have predictability on many of these things. We're much smaller. We have the ability to pull together regulatory structures. We house the Small Business Regulatory Commission inside our agency, where we go in and we start striking through the things that are a problem, bring them up, and bring them to the legislature or the appropriate agency. There needs to be some kind of clearinghouse. Porter's position is, I think, pretty similar to what you're hearing from this panel, and that is we need stability, predictability. In order to do that, someone has to be watching. Someone has to be measuring. I mean, in the manufacturing world, Mr. Harberts comes from and I come from, you measure everything. And we need to measure what is having an ill effect on our competitiveness. We can be more competitive as a country. I will tell you, we don't seem to have the attitude to be as competitive to the rest of the world as parts of the rest of the world have to be competitive with us, which is why we hear about Brazil and why we hear about what's going on in China and Indonesia and India and other places. And when we go and look at the secrets there, what you find very quickly is you have predictability in those markets that have been created by having whether it's through a commerce function or other function, there's one stop, as she asked about, where someone can come and find out, how do I do business here? We are almost half of the our new investment in South Carolina each year is foreign. We are talking with people from all over the world. They want to know, how do you do it here? I've had them ask me, can you tell me that what is going on in your federal government? I've literally had them ask me that. And I'll tell them, well, we'll take care of you here in the state. Because there is such a perception that there is not a stable, predictable environment. So it's heard, whether it's health care, whether it's regulatory issues, not funding infrastructure and the like, all of these things. I had a very wealthy couple that I met with and had breakfast with this morning that employ 80,000 people worldwide and are looking to make their first manufacturing investment in the United States. And they asked me what kind of investments were we making for the future in South Carolina. And I was happy to be able to tell them we were investing about $2 billion in our port and logistics system, a railway system that you know that is under our operation in the Commerce Department, because we are preparing to be even better and faster at logistics for our manufacturers in the future. So companies are asking us what we are doing to enable and prepare them to be competitive in the future. I think the states that do the best job at that will win. I hope mine's one of them.
Well, see, you just heard that attitude of competitiveness right there. Did you hear that?
I'd like to hear more of it.
My question to you is, can you give me any suggestion on how we create that attitude of competitiveness at the national level? Any suggestion? I know that's an oddball question that you didn't see coming.
So you talked about measuring. Manufacturers measure things. We're all sitting here talking about whether this is happening. right? We're all not even, we're pointing, we're like a blind person trying to describe an elephant by touch. We're saying, this is happening in South Carolina, this was announced in this place. If we had a better reporting structure where we could say, this is what we've gained that we had been losing. I think one of the things that is not emphasized enough in all of this discussion is we were losing, we were bleeding, we're stabilized and we're improving. That, to an equity investor, that's huge. That's not the way most of the world thinks, but that is an absolutely wonderful, massive, fantastic change. Talking about that, publicizing it, creating a website, having a place where everything gets listed, where when someone starts to talk about an improvement in manufacturing in the United States, you say, yeah, you know, go to it's actually happening.gov and start to show things, and then start to have that also create mentors so that when people have an opportunity and they're trying to figure out how to navigate it, they can maybe find the examples of where it's been done. I do think South Carolina has done this incredibly well, and it does come down to the attitude and the organization. It is, I think, going to be much more difficult at a federal level because the states do also play such a big role. So that things aren't apples to apples in every different place, and it's not going to be that simple. But I hesitate to say create an office or come up with a person or any of those things. I just think that lots of little efforts in a lot of different places can all start to add up.
You know, in my opinion, there's nothing more important than this. This is our way out of the malaise. This is our way out of our unemployment problems. This is our way out of our entitlement problems. This is our way out of a lot of crime problems. This is our way out of many of the biggest issues that face us right now. And I wish I knew how to create that attitude of competitiveness that you have, Mr. Secretary, at the national level. And any suggestions y'all can give, I sure want to hear.
Well, again, I earnestly believe that greater predictability is what drives manufacturing. Manufacturing. What this man is saying is, if I can control these things around me, I can make a profit. And if I can make a profit, I can sell more, whether it's candles or whether it's machined parts for a variety of industries. Everyone who makes something wants to make more. They want to have more people working, and they want to have more production. There is a strong competitive spirit in this country. We're seeing it going on right now in the innovation levels, I think, with what we're seeing with high-tech business creation down the lower level. I see young people that say they don't want to wear a coat and tie and go to work like the rest of us. They want to do something different. And you're seeing this whole code world grow up now with the applications and the like. I believe there's a lot of activity. Government has not figured out how to enable it. I was recently given some money by the legislature to try to go and see how we could help foster this. I put out a program. I got 37 applications within 6 weeks from programs that want to work in the area of innovation. Innovation is something that is classically American. It is what we do that gives us the competitive edge and the productivity edge. But right now, we're all sort of just watching it. We're not necessarily feeding it. And I don't know the exact way to feed it, Congressman. What I know is we right now have so many unpredictable pieces that what I hear from people is they don't want to take the risk. Again, the group I met with this morning for breakfast before I flew here, making their first effort. It's a very scary thing to come from another part of the world and set up a huge capital investment into the hundreds of millions of dollars. And they're looking for predictability. We've done quite a few in the last 3 years, and they're starting to trust us. But I think it goes back to we need to communicate more. People see that trust. I hear from innovation people, if you just tell the story about what we're doing, it would be much better. So we're not telling the story, and we're not giving predictable outcomes. And that's what Porter is saying with sustainable budgets. All of that is give people the ability to predict their business atmosphere so they can be successful.
Okay. Let me ask you one more question. I'm going to turn it back over to I'm sorry I've done so long. I'm enjoying this thing. If there's one thing that worries you, one thing that really needs to be fixed, okay? One thing that is costing you bringing jobs in, what is it?
I would have to say the public education system, which I think is at the root of a lot of the problems that people are having with finding employees. And I don't think it's always as complicated as creating new programs. I think that we need to get back to focusing on basic blocking and tackling and making certain that every child has the opportunity to thrive and to have all the skills necessary to work in one of these new, more complicated, more quantitative manufacturing jobs. It doesn't sound fast or easy, but I think it's one of the most important things.
I have to agree, workforce development, when you are trying to locate a company, the first thing they want is a site. Once you get past the site, you're now in the competition for that. The next question is people, and are there qualified people that we can hire? So you have to throw everything at it. You have to have customized training. You have to have apprenticeships. We've done all of these things to give people confidence in it. And let's remember, a generation ago, when I was a young person, way back in the 50s and the 60s, our parents told us to get an education, don't work in the mill. Well, it's a new day. Now we're trying to get people to go back in the mill because, as Mr. Harbert said, it's a different mill. And we right now are working sort of against ourselves. I think we need to have innovation in education like manufacturing high schools or medical high schools or different sort of categories to create some excitement. In South Carolina, we had a problem at my old employer trying to find people who could maintain all of our equipment, very high-tech equipment in the plant with. And we were spending enormous amounts of money training people to be equipment services people. We took a page out of the Germans. We even stole a word they made up called mechatronics and created a mechatronics program, and it just took off. Why? Mechatronics sounded cool. Well, that's part of it. It is a marketing. We all want to be what we feel. We want to enjoy what we do. Our work is so much a part of what we do every day. So we need to attract people to this again, and that means we need to talk positively about it and about what the success is to the children, but also to the parents who sometimes say, no, I don't want you doing that.
And also sometimes to the school districts. I've heard companies that have gone to school districts and tried to create programs like this and been told, no, every child from this school is going to go on to college. Now, a lot of those students then went on to expensive, not very good colleges and have college debt that they can't repay and are much worse off in every level than they would have been if they had just been permitted to get really good skills and training in this area that this company wanted to train them in. But the attitude was that that was not acceptable.
Thank you. I yield it. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Thank you. I yield to the ranking member.
I asked my questions, and so,
Okay.
Yeah,
Is that
yeah.
what I have followed?
okay.
So where do we go from here? Closing? All right. I have truly enjoyed this. I really have. Thank you very, very much. I've learned a lot, and I appreciate it. Once again, I'd like to thank you, thank the witnesses for appearing today. You have all provided important insight into how policy decisions in Washington impact small manufacturers operating in the real economy. I ask unanimous consent that the members and the public have 5 legislative days to insert statements and extraneous materials into the hearing record. Hearing no objection so ordered, the committee is now adjourned.